This is a video presentation of Bible 2114, Unit 3, entitled Our English Bible. As a result of this unit, students should have some knowledge of and be able to answer questions concerning 1. The history of the English Bible, 2. The work of Wycliffe, 3. The contribution of John Gutenberg, 4. The work of William Tyndale, 5. Some of the translations and their characteristics.
We do not know who first brought the Bible as far north as England. The records of a church council in France in the year 314 tell of bishops from London and York being in attendance. So the Bible must have been in England then. By the 5th and 6th centuries, energetic missionaries like Patrick and were at work in Ireland, and Ninian in Scotland and northern England. The earliest translation is that of the Gospel of St. John, rendered into Anglo-Saxon by the Venerable Bede, a monk who died in 735. But no copies of it remain. Sometime in the 800s, a monk wrote an Anglo-Saxon between the lines of a Latin Gospel. Latin was the language of the educated class, but the parish priest needed help in explaining the Gospel to the people who could not understand Latin. For several centuries, books and even learning to read were beyond the reach of most people, and they had to depend on what they heard from the parish priests and in religious plays on market days.
Then in the 14th century, God raised up in England who was to be a powerful force to produce the first Bible in the people's language. This man was John Wycliffe, a great scholar and a priest of the church. He believed that people should be governed by the Bible alone. Wycliffe dared to say that he wanted the whole Bible translated into the people's language. So scholars went to work at it. His loyal followers, John Purvey and Nicholas Hereford, kept at it steadily, and by 1388 the work was completed. For the first time, the entire Bible was written in our own English language. For us, the only Bible in English. To get this English Bible to the people, copies had to be made, and that took much time, for every copy had to be written by hand and in secret. There was always the danger, soon to be realized, that the church authorities would step in and try to destroy the work done. There were few copies of his English Bible. Wycliffe's followers, called Lollards, towns and villages with parts of the Bible. Whenever they could get a group of people together, they would read to them and teach them. The church authorities did their best to end to this. Those who were caught were punished, and some of them were even burned at the stake. Wycliffe himself died before the persecution set in, so he could not be punished. But his body was dug up and burned, and the ashes thrown into a nearby stream.
But 3 great events were to bring great changes. The first of these was the invention about 1450 by John Gutenberg of type for. Now the laborious hand copying avoided, and many more copies be quickly made. The very first book to come from Gutenberg's press was the Bible. True, it was a Latin Bible, which the people could not understand, but translations in the people's language were soon to be false. The news of Gutenberg's great invention spread to other countries. Within 50 years, parts of the Bible appeared in print, in no less than 6 languages.
great event was the beginning of new knowledge of the Greek language. Many ancient New Testament copies, or as they were called, were brought into Europe from the Christian churches in the Near East. Scholars in Europe eagerly studied them. One of these scholars was a Dutchman named Erasmus. He studied all the manuscripts of the Greek New Testament to find out what mistakes had been made in the copy. Then, in 1516, he issued the first published Greek New Testament with a powerful Latin translation. This was used by other scholars to make translations into the various languages of the people.
The third great event took place in Germany. A year after Erasmus published his New Testament in Greek, Martin Luther, a German monk and university professor, questioned the authority of the Roman Catholic Church in many things. Luther's arguments were printed and widely read. The Church, through the Emperor, demanded that Luther recant, that is, take back what he had said. But Luther said, "It is impossible for me to recant unless I am proved wrong by the testimony of Scripture. My conscience is bound by the Word of God. Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise." For such defiance, the church and state authorities would have put Luther to death. But his friend came away in the castle of the Wartburg in Germany. There he translated into German for the and began also on translating the Old Testament.
Yet there was still no printed Bible in English. They had raised up a man from Oxford to William Tyndale, notable scholar east of the church, thoroughly capable of the Bible in English. The wrote Scripture. It is impossible to, unless they are plainly laid. Authorities had altogether.
We had clerk and farmer going to believe right or not.
Tyndale pleaded and argued, but to no avail. The church authorities would under no circumstance approve an English Bible. So Tyndale packed his belongings and went to Hamburg, Germany, determined to carry out his plan. In Germany, Tyndale could work on his translation, but he still had to do it in secret, and he was always in danger of severe punishment if he was caught. When his New Testament was finished, and he was about to have it printed, he was discovered by the authorities and barely escaped to another part of Germany. There he managed to get 3,000 copies printed. Thus, in 1525, there came into being the first printed New Testament in English, the greatest single contribution to our English Bible.
The church authorities in England had been warned that Tyndale was having his English New Testament printed in Germany, so the books had to be smuggled into England. Friendly merchants hid them in sacks of wheat and bags of other products on their ships, and soon the precious books began to arrive in England, greatly welcomed by people everywhere. The authorities did everything they could to stop the people from getting the books and reading them. They arrested everyone caught smuggling them or having them in their possession. For a while, it looked as though they would succeed, for the first edition was almost completely destroyed. But the English people were determined to have Tyndale's New Testament, and they were willing to risk any dangers to get it. This time, the people won out, for the books kept coming off the presses faster than the authorities could destroy them. Tyndale in Europe continued faithfully at his work. He improved his New Testament translation and added parts of the Old Testament. More and more copies were printed and smuggled into England, and soon his book had a wide circulation there. When Tyndale had translated about half of the Old Testament, he was betrayed and imprisoned near Brussels in Belgium. He wrote to his friends, asking for a warm coat and a candle.
Above all, beseech and entreat that the procurer may permit me my Hebrew Bible, grammar, and dictionary, that I may spend my time with that study. If I must remain during the whole winter, I shall be patient, abiding the will of God, to the glory of the grace of my Lord Jesus Christ.
After being in prison for a year and a half, Tyndale was cruelly strangled and his body burned at the stake. His last words were a never-to-be-forgotten prayer.
Lord, open thou the King of England's eyes.
Tyndale gave his life that we might have our Bible. But it was another man, Miles Coverdale, a fellow scholar and co-worker, who finished the English translation of the whole Bible, using much of Tyndale's work and some German and Latin translations. Thus was completed in 1535 the first printed English Bible. Soon the hostile judgment of the authorities of church and state was reversed, for the second edition was printed with the king's permission. Tyndale's prayer had been granted. The church authorities went further. They stated that every church was to set up a Bible of the largest size, called the Great Bible, so that people could read it or have someone read it to them. These Bibles were usually chained to keep them from being stolen. Others also appeared with varying degrees of church approval. Thomas Matthew's Bible, the Bishop's Bible, and the Roman Catholic Reims Douay Bible. One of these, printed some 25 years after Coverdale, was called the Geneva Bible, after the city in Switzerland where it was printed. It was the first printed Bible that looked like most of ours today. That is, it had its verses paragraphed and numbered as we have. Before this time, the books of the Bible were divided only into chapters. A French printer named Robert Etienne was the first to number the verses, and these numbers have been put into all Bibles ever since. Thus the Bible made its long journey across Europe into our English language, and in many printed editions became available to all the people of England, Protestant and Catholic alike.
The English Bible was brought to America first in 1607 by the early Virginia settlers at Jamestown, who were required by law to respect its authority. At almost the same time, the Pilgrims, landing in Plymouth in Massachusetts in 1620, also brought the Bible, for it was the center of their faith and life. Here is the Geneva Bible, which William Bradford, governor of Plymouth Colony, brought with him on the Mayflower in 1620. This is the version which the pioneers brought, though some later colonists would have used the Bishop's Bible. Though many of these Geneva Bibles reached America in colonial days, there was another Bible, like this one brought by John Winthrop in 1630, which had far and away the most profound influence on America. This was the King James Version.
For the beginnings of this, we must return to England. In 1604, King James received a group of church leaders at Hampton Court to consider certain problems in the church. Toward the end of the three-day conference, Dr. John Reynolds made a proposal.
Might I suggest that Your Majesty authorize a new translation of the Bible? Those that have been made do not in all cases express the exact meaning of the Greek and Hebrew tongues.
There was opposition to this expressed by Bishop Bancroft of London.
Oh, sir, if every man's humor were consulted, there would be no end of translations.
But King James approved.
It is our wish that some special pains be taken in behalf of one uniform translation. Let this be done by the best learned in both universities, Oxford and Cambridge, and the whole church to be bound by it and none other.
Many scholars were called together and organized into 6 groups, 4 on the Old Testament and 2 on the New Testament. It was decided not to make a new translation, but a revision in which the best of the existing English Bibles was to continue. When the committee had finished their work after nearly 3 years, a small group assembled and checked the results before the manuscript was prepared for the printers. Finally, in 1611, it was completed. Here, Tyndale's influence showed itself in its fullness, for 9/10 of the New Testament was from his translation. As a tribute to the king, the book was dedicated to the most high and mighty Prince James. For that reason, it is generally known as the King James Bible. For more than 300 years, the King James Bible has been read and cherished by English-speaking people everywhere, and it continues to mold the life, the culture, the moral standards, and the religion of the English-speaking peoples of the world.
Yet when the United States first became a nation, Bibles, because they had to be imported, were very hard to secure. Credit goes to Robert Aitken, a printer in Philadelphia, for producing the first English Bible printed in America, a book which Congress, by resolution, commended to the public. But even Aitken and his successors could not meet the needs of our growing country. Following the model of the British Bible Society, founded 4 years earlier, some citizens of Philadelphia in 1808 started the first Bible Society in America. This was soon followed by hundreds of others, many of which united in 1816 at the City Hall in New York to form the American Bible Society. Its purpose was to supply scriptures to these Bible societies and to try also to supply the vast regions of the West which were opening up to settlement. This the American Bible Society did. With the support of hundreds of thousands of American citizens, it has sent out from presses in the old Bible House and other presses that it employed more than 500 million Bibles, Testaments, Gospels, and other portions, not only in America, but throughout the world. To soldiers, sailors, workers, children, and people in every walk of life in America, the Bible still comes, because Americans who love the Bible have helped the Bible Society bring it to them.
But the King James Bible could not be the final translation. Many ancient copies of parts of the Bible were unknown to the scholars of that time. More than 200 years after the King James Version, a young German scholar named Tischendorf found in an ancient convent on Mount Sinai a very old copy of almost the entire Old and New Testaments in Greek. This was the famous Codex Sinaiticus, written in the 4th century, 600 years earlier than any manuscript of the King James translators used. About the same time, other great manuscripts came to light and were published, among them the Codex Vaticanus in Rome and the Codex Alexandrinus in London. These started biblical scholars on a long and intensive comparison of manuscripts to find the earliest possible wording of the Bible text. The results appeared in the revised version of 1881 and 1885, prepared by a British committee, and in 1901 in the American Standard Revised Version, prepared by an American committee of scholars which had worked with the British committee. Still other translations were made by individual scholars or groups of scholars. In 50 years, some 19 revisions or new translations of the whole Bible appeared, many of them in the United States. For still new light was coming from new discoveries of manuscripts, such as the so-called Dead Sea Scrolls, found in jars in caves near the Dead Sea. And also our English language has been changing. For example, in the time of King James, suffer meant permit, as in suffer little children to come unto me. Prevent, which then meant simply to precede, now means to hinder. Thus the need was more and more felt for a revision of the King James Bible. A group of American scholars in 1937 started to make such a revision. There were 32 scholars on this great work, and they labored long and hard. By 1946, they had completed and published the New Testament, and 6 years later, in 1952, the entire Bible.
This revision was called Revised Standard Version. New revisions and translations have continued to appear, and many people are now confused by the number and types of Bibles available. It is possible to even obtain a copy made from 26 versions. Bibles have been produced by Protestants, Catholics, and Jews. The Jewish Publication Society produced its first translation in 1917. It presently is working on a complete revision of the Old Testament, but to date only the Torah, or the 5 books of Moses, have been published. This was done in 1962. The Amplified Bible is exactly what the title implies. Alternative words are inserted into the text to suggest various nuances. The weakness of the Bible is this very thing. A reader needs to know the most likely meaning possible in any given text, not a multitude of possibilities. The same year, 1958, saw the publication of a new, fresh, and vigorous translation by an English scholar, J.B. Phillips. A year later, a conservative work appeared called the Berkeley Version. The New Testament was all done by a single individual, and each book in the Old Testament is basically the work of one person. The New English Bible was published in 1961. It is English, and takes many liberties with the text, but it is a great improvement over earlier translations. The Jerusalem Bible is translated from the original text, but depends heavily on the French edition. It was first published in 1966. It tends towards a paraphrase rather than a translation. The Living Bible, published as a complete unit by Kenneth Taylor in 1971, is a very free and colloquial paraphrase. It is easy reading, but sometimes is inaccurate because of the paraphrasing. The New American Bible is an excellent work done by members of the Catholic Biblical Association of America and published in 1970. For anyone wanting a readable, accurate, and conservative Bible, this is recommended. It has one drawback, and that is that the names are spelled differently than in a Protestant Bible. The latest, most accurate, and most readable translation is the New International Version. The New Testament appeared in 1973, but the Old Testament is still in process. Members of the ORU Theological Department have been working on the Old Testament material since 1967. doubt, as time goes on, more revisions will be made, perfecting the language, but not changing the great history and the great truth which the Bible brings to men. In this unit, we have dealt with the history of the English Bible, showing the original work of John Wycliffe, the first to translate parts of the Bible into English, the contribution of John Gutenberg with his printing press, the work of William Tyndale. 9/10 of his work was used in the New Testament of the King James Version, and some of the newer translations and their characteristics. This has been a video presentation of Bible 2114, Unit 3, entitled Our English Bible. This is the end of the text.